So it relies heavily upon the living tradition. So Imam Malik said Sunnah can be established by hadith and also by the living tradition of the people of Medina, which had been praised by the Prophet himself. And he said that the best of generations is my generation, and those who follow them, and those who follow them. And Imam Malik was living amongst those of the third generation, and believed that the Sunnah had been preserved so very well in that particular city, because the Prophet ﷺ, when most of the legal injunctions or the judgments related to Islamic practice were revealed, they were revealed in Medina. And almost all the Sahaba during the time of the Prophet ﷺ lived in Medina. The Prophet, he lived there, and so the way that Imam Malik and even the scholars of Medina had viewed it, they viewed this issue was that if any hadith had been heard, it had to be heard in Medina, and if any sunnah was practiced, it had to be practiced in Medina. And so that was just their logic, So if a hadith came from outside of Medina, and then we checked them with the scholars of Medina and say, well, you ever see this hadith or heard this hadith before? I said, no, never heard that before. Get it out of here. that was their attitude. It was, especially if it came from Iraq, right? Where Abu Hanifa was. So it was some sort of, it was a bit of tribalism in a certain extent, or fanaticism about the scholars of Medina during this early period. So it was a problem where they would only accept hadith that came from Medina, and they were very suspicious of hadith that came from outside of Medina, and in particular from Iraq, because the way they saw it was like, well, Iraq was the same place where the people who came, they killed Uthman ibn Affan. They came from Iraq. They came from Basra. That's where they were, right? So, and also the Shia, they started in Iraq. The Mu'tazila, they started in Iraq. So all this sort of polemic, the Maliki polemic against the Hanafis, and so they're giving their reasons why they did not want to accept the hadith and other things from Iraq. And also we find that later on. And prior to that, Imam Shafi'i said that the most authentic book on the face of the earth after the Book of Allah is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. But that was before the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari. But even Imam al-Bukhari has what is called the golden chain, or at least in his view. His view considered to be the strongest chain of narration. Of hadith, which is Malik from Nafi' from Ibn Umar. So Malik ibn Anas from his Sheikh Nafi', who was a free slave of Abdullah ibn Umar, and Abdullah ibn Umar related from the Prophet ﷺ. Imam Bukhari calls that the golden chain. Any hadith with that chain is one of the strongest chain of hadith that one can have. But other scholars differ with Imam Bukhari on that. They didn't all agree about this. So some of them preferred other chains and said this is the most authentic chain. But that was Imam Bukhari's chain. But all of the scholars of hadith, they agree that the most authentic of hadith are those that originate from Medina. The scholars of hadith all say this. The most authentic, the soundest, the strongest hadiths are those that originate from Medina, and then those that come from Mecca, and then comes that come from Sham. So those are the strongest hadith in that order. So Imam Malik's madhab primarily relies upon what are called the seven fuqaha, or the seven jurors of Medina, or the seven Medinite jurors, fuqaha sab'a, and they are Sa'id ibn Musayyib, first and foremost, was the most famous of them from the Tabi'een. Sa'id ibn Musayyib is considered to be the most knowledgeable of all of the Tabi'een, by consensus of the scholars, that he was the most knowledgeable of all of them, and he was one of the fuqaha of Medina. The Urwa ibn Zubair, who is the son of Asma bint Abi Bakr, and his father was Zubair ibn Awam, who was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, who was the second, Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and so this is the grandson of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Al-Qasim. The fourth, Kharij ibn Zayd ibn Thabit, who was the son of Zayd ibn Thabit. Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah ibn Utbah ibn Mas'ud, who was the great-grandson of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Sulaiman ibn Yasar, Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar. And they differ about the seventh person. So some say that Salim ibn Abdullah ibn Umar who was the grandson of Umar ibn Khattab, or Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman, meaning the son of Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, Abu Bakr, and then Abu Salama ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, who was the other son of Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. So they differ about the seventh of them, but the other six are agreed upon that these are the six of the seven Fuqaha of Medina. And so Imam Malik's fiqh is very much rooted in that, but also Imam Malik's fiqh is rooted in the madhab of Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhu, is much vetted into that madhab, and his son Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab, radiallahu anhuma, knowing that it is stated by the scholars that no one was stricter or more strictly adhered to the sunnah of the Prophet than Abdullah ibn Umar. That he was the strictest about the sunnah. Even he heard one time that he saw one time the Prophet had, he heard about he went down a particular road one time, and so Abdullah ibn Umar, he even went to walk down that same road that the Prophet did, just to get the barakah of the sunnah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the sources of Maliki jurisprudence are many. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we heard that Muwatta. The next most important work is called Al-Mudawwanah al-Kubra, Imam Sahnun ibn Sa'id al-Tanuhi, amongst the Egyptian scholars who died in 240 after the Hijrah. And there are a number of other sources. Some of the sources were sources that were preferred by the people of Andalus, such as the Utbiyah of Muhammad al-Utbi, who died in 255 after the Hijrah. And the difference between the Utbiyah and the Mudawwanah and the other works has to do with certain opinions that are attributed to Imam Malik and the Utbiyah. They differ than those who are attributed to Imam Malik and the other works. So you find that there were certain schools even within the Maliki school. It's and we're going to see some of those. Some of the works that are translated into English. The Risala ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, who died in 996 of the Christian era. This has been translated quite a few times. There's probably 3, 4 different or 5 different translations of this work into English. You can find one-line translations of it. The Risala ibn Abi Zayd. There's Aisha Bewley has a translation of it. There's in a Nigerian translation. There's a Moroccan translation. There's the translation of Joseph Kinney. There are a number of different translations of the Risala ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. And then there's also a translation for the book called the Al-Muqaddimah al-Izziyah by Imam Abul Hasan, which I'm trying to see where it had Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal ibn Khalf ibn Jibril al-Manufi al-Misri, who was the author. So Muhammad 3 times. Muhammad ibn Khalil ibn Jibril al-Manufi, who died in 1533 of the Christian era. He is also one of the works that's translated. I can't recall. I'm trying to remember who translated it. I have a digital version of it at home.
It's Nigerian translation.
It's Nigerian translation. Okay, yeah, but it's relatively good translation. And so those are 2 books that are already up the Maliki school. There's not much translated in English as far as Maliki works. We've been waiting for quite a while for Sheikh Hamza's translation of Ibn Ashir. I have my own translation of it, and I abandoned the project once I saw Sheikh Hamza was doing it. But I told him, I said, "You're taking quite a bit of time, with it." So I think that it's going to be coming out pretty soon. It'll be out this year, and that'll be another resource. And Sheikh Hamza has translated the Akhdari, but I'm not sure when that also will be out, made official. I know he'll be translated and utilized it at some of the Deen intensive programs. Right, the Akhdari's text, right? The text of Imam Akhdari, and I'm in the process of translating a commentary on Imam Akhdari's text too. And so you might find some translation of the Makhsasa Khalil. So there are some works that are translated into English, but which are